Now you are welcome into the second hour of the show. It's Maria in for Damien. He's going to be back with you tomorrow and normal service shall resume. I'm sure there'll be another... Is there another 12 with Tiernan tomorrow, Julie? Yes, there is. So that'll be all kicking off again when Damien is back with you tomorrow. How are you enjoying this election campaign, or are you sick of them all? Or let me know your thoughts on it on 083 33 975. Are you all geared up? You can't wait to get into the booth, or are you all jaded with politics in general? I'd love to know your thoughts on that, please. 083 33 975 or call 051 846 123 and get in touch with us that way. Now, as I said at the top of the programme, I was talking about this man who was, he had a claim in against the Motor Insurers Bureau of Ireland. These are people who, they compensate victims of non-insured cars, and this bloke said he couldn't find the car, couldn't track down the car that had injured him, and he had a wheelchair and he had crutches and looked very forlorn altogether if you only saw one part of the footage. But if you saw the rest of the footage, there he was lifting his wheelchair in and out of his car, doing a little jig for himself, walking around completely unaided, while in the next clip you'd see him being helped on. He withdrew his claim, his High Court action, in which he claimed his bike was hit by a car that couldn't be traced. And Peter Boland is with the Alliance for Insurance Reform, and he's on the line now. Peter, you're very welcome to the programme.
Good morning.
I love, God forgive me, I love seeing footage like this. I love seeing people cut out if they're trying to do something bad. But am I right in saying there is no sanction against him or anyone like him now?
Okay, well, I'm going to be very careful and not refer specifically to this case because, as you can imagine, there may be criminal consequences on this one. So I'm going to talk about the experience of our members who are policy holders right across the board: commercial, voluntary, community, charity, sport, etc. And so essentially we see cases like this all the time. I suppose what makes this one stand out is just how good the CCTV footage was. And I applaud the Motor Insurance Bureau's bravery in putting it out there, because very often what we see is that insurers in particular prefer to settle and move on rather than get involved in the expense of a High Court case. So we've umpteen cases where members are 100% clear that they weren't at fault, they have CCTV, and the insurers just go and settle anyway. Now, why is that? Well, I suppose, first of all, is that there's almost a nuisance value to it. They just want to be done, and at the end of the day, they just pass the cost on to policyholders, so they're not at a loss. The second thing is that it's very, very difficult to prosecute these kind of cases on a couple of different levels. So, like you say, essentially this is a sanction-free zone. So you can go in, you can make multiple claims, you might get money on some of them, you mightn't on others. But the worst that can happen typically is that the case gets thrown out. There has been only one prosecution under the existing law since it was put in place in 2004. And typically what happens is that even if costs are awarded against you, which happened in this case, there's no follow-through. So I'd be really surprised if the Motor Insurance Bureau, as in many cases, actually get their costs on this.
And that's wrong, isn't it? That anybody who engages in this kind of activity can effectively just walk away and just, you can nearly understand why people would try if there's really no sanction at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah.
And we all pick up the tab for that.
There was a lot of money at stake in that case, up to €60,000. And what's compounding it is that the Gardaí are not geared up for this. So there's been a lot of reporting recently about just whether or not there are many fraud cases, whether there's a fraud culture or a claim culture in this country, and just what is the extent of it. But the reality is that the Gardaí are not geared up to deal with it. And we've come across so many cases where businesses that insure themselves, for example, so not insurance companies, but businesses that insure themselves, just don't bother bringing the case to the Gardaí because they know that they're not geared up to deal with it. And since this whole crisis began, there's been an awful lot of talk about establishing a Garda insurance fraud unit. Not a red cent has been given to the Gardaí to address this issue. Mm-hmm. And we would, as you know, we're right in the thick of an election now. We would call on all the parties to clarify that they will put money aside for a specialist Garda insurance fraud unit, because without that, there isn't a chance, even if the sanctions are there, there's no chance of them being followed through unless the Gardaí are geared up for it.
What else would you do, Peter, if I was to put you in charge of insurance reform? What would you do?
Okay, well, the big one is the amount of money to be made out of this. So very minor injuries that are solved with a couple of paracetamol are averaging €17,000 in this country. There's no precedent for that globally, and certainly in Europe, there's nothing like that in the UK.
Where did that come from? How did we get to this stage?
Funny, that's a really good question. We got to this stage because it was let happen. And so essentially who's been driving this for the last decades are the people who are making money out of it. So the lawyers are making about $350 million a year out of personal injury. The insurers are making about $250 million a year. And obviously there are the plaintiffs, many of them genuine, and we have no issue with genuine claims where people are injured due to the negligence of others. But unfortunately what has happened is that it's evolved into a situation where there's just huge money to be made. The government allowed this to develop over many, many decades. The judges obviously had a part to play in this because they're the ones who award the damages, and nobody shouted stop until now. It's a real sickener, isn't it? It is. And now, there is, I don't want to be too bleak about it, there is work in progress. I make it very clear, nothing that has happened so far, for all the talk, nothing that has happened so far has applied any downward pressure on insurance premiums. But there is a judicial council in place now. They're holding their first meeting on the 7th of February, and that's essentially a collection of all the judges in the country. And they are charged with setting up a committee called the Personal Injuries Guidelines Committee, which then has until the 7th of November to come up with revised guidelines. And we would fully expect that the judges on that committee would take their role very seriously, as I'm sure they will, and would take the common mind keep the common good in mind, I beg your pardon, when they're putting together these new guidelines. Because whatever about the rights and wrongs of individual situations, that needs to be kept in mind. Ireland cannot afford to continue to pay those sort of monies because we are looking at whole sectors within the voluntary community sporting areas starting to wind down. It's just not affordable to pay for this anymore. And I know that I saw, I think he's a surgeon on the news fairly recently talking about whiplash. For a start, there's kind of no such thing as whiplash per se, but a lot of the people who would come in, as soon as they get their settlement, he never sees them again. And it's an easy fix, I think, for instead of giving out money, give them out, like, we'll pay your bills for we'll pay the damages that you had to your body. We'll make sure you get your treatment. You won't be out of money for if you have a job that, you won't lose out there. And that's all it is. You don't get 17 grand for, like, getting whatever it is. Yeah, and you make a very good point. Like, the medical bills are paid separately. So there's a thing called special damages, which covers medical bills and loss of earnings. And again, nobody has any beef with that. Because the whole idea of damage is to get you back to where you were before the injury occurred. Yeah. But that 17 grand is on top of that, and that's really just to cover pain and suffering. And like I say, that's 17 grand for the pain and suffering of a bruised thumb or a sore neck that recovers after a couple of weeks. And it's 4.4 times higher than the UK. And the UK are driving those costs down at the moment because they realise as well that this is just not sustainable. What this is doing is enriching a very small number of citizens and the legal profession and the insurance industry, and everybody else is footing the bill. And I've actually just come from a meeting in Dublin where there was a collection of small businesses and voluntary groups, and their assessment would be very bleak if things don't change, because what you have is business people borrowing money to pay their insurance premium now, and clearly that's not sustainable. And you have community groups going out and waving the bucket around in order to pay this year's premium. And you can imagine, like, it is so difficult to raise money for voluntary groups, and to have to go back out again when you get your renewal and say, well, we actually need more money just to pay our insurance premium. That's a very hard thing to do.
And also, I'm just going to say it, but we both would be in total agreement of the fact that there are people who get awards and they have earned every red cent of it and deserve every red cent of it. And we're not talking about people like that. We're talking about people who, there's really nothing wrong with you that, as you say, a couple of paracetamol will cure, or there's nothing wrong with you at all and you're just trying to pull a fast one. They're the kind of people we're talking about.
Well, I have a serious worry about genuine claimants, because what this whole thing is doing over the last few years is criminalising them. And I've come across plenty of cases where people told me about genuine injuries that they suffered because of the negligence of somebody else, which is fine. And that's what insurance is there for. But then they were afraid to make a claim because it made them look criminal. Yeah. And they're the people who are particularly suffering from this area. But it's affecting everybody. So whether it's motor or liability insurance, and increasingly I'm hearing the same story about house insurance, which is starting from a smaller base. But again, I'm hearing of rates doubling over the last year or so. So it is affecting everybody. Okay, we leave it there. Peter, thanks a million for talking to me. Not at all, thank you. See you, bye-bye. Good morning. That's Peter Boland there of the Alliance for Insurance Reform, just about those bogus insurance claims. And you know, it is a total sickener when you think that, and if they're going to be, like, they're effectively giving away money at times, and you can nearly understand that Cheshire will have a go if that's the kind of mindset that you have. I'd say a lot of people would never dream of it, but there are somebody, maybe they need the money. We don't know the backstory for these people. But I just think that if you just did away with an award for, you know, breaking a nail or something, then you do away with an awful lot of it. And that should be an easy fix. That shouldn't be a big drama for anything at all. I'm going to take a break now, and we're going to be talking about the new changes for school enrolments when we come back. Get involved if you want. 083 333 975 051 846 123. You are welcome back to the programme. Now, there's going to be changes to new school admission laws. You can't put a baby's name down for school, for example. Limits for places for children of past pupils and a few other things. And Catherine Donnelly, the Irish Independent's education correspondent, is on the line to fill us in a bit more. Sorry to keep you holding there, Catherine.
Okay, Maria, good morning.
Good morning to you. So, I've mentioned a few of the changes there. Why has this happened?
Well, well, I suppose the first thing I should say maybe as an introduction is that about 80% of schools can accept all comers. So in fact, a lot of what's happening now won't affect the overwhelming majority of schools. However, issues have arisen over the years that have, left some parents squeezed out of a place, other parents just feeling that they were unfairly treated and that there was a lack of transparency about what the admission criteria were, and even if there was transparency, that it favoured one cohort of parents over another. So over the last number of years, the Department of Education under various ministers have been working through this new legislation with a view to making the entire process more fair and more transparent. An example of the sort of thing that we would have seen in, say, the last decade or so is that we know there's been a big influx of new families into Ireland. There's also been a lot of movement within Ireland, because of the housing situation. People have moved from perhaps, the area in which they grew up to another area because the housing was cheaper. And then those families would find themselves, young with the children coming along for school-going age, and then applying to the local school and finding that the places were already gone because everybody living in the area had already bagged those places since their own children were born. So that was one way in which the unfairness was showing through. New families moving into an area for whatever reason and finding that they couldn't get into a new school or into the local school, into the one closest to them, which is what makes sense for most people.
So, do you think that these will really cause problems for people down the line?
No, Well, they shouldn't cause any problems because the whole process is designed to be fairer and more transparent. So what happens now is that from the 1st of February, schools have to draft new admission policies that are to ensure that they are compliant with the legislation. And the legislation, as I say, most schools can take all comers, but about 20% of schools find that they're oversubscribed. In other words, they have more applications than there are places. And those schools can apply selection criteria, and it's those selection criteria that have to be fair. So, for instance, a typical selection criterion would be, naming the primary schools from which, students will get priority. And that could be schools within a catchment area, or in the case of, say, a minority religion school, like, say, a Church of Ireland school, those named primary schools could be the Church of Ireland primary schools over a broader area. The schools will also be allowed to prioritise siblings of existing or recent pupils. Where new limits are coming in is that schools, where this applied, schools will have to put a cap of 25% on the number of children of sons or daughters or grandsons or daughters of former pupils who they may admit in a given year. That is a feature probably that affects certainly fee-paying schools around the country. It affects a lot of schools in the Dublin area. It may not be an issue in many parts of the country, and that 25% cap will, over time, will limit or have an impact on the overall spread of the background of pupils coming into a school.
And what about religion?
Religion, well, that went in a previous iteration of this legislation back in October 2018. The first round of reforms under the legislation was introduced, and at that point, primary schools were told they couldn't use discrimination, or they couldn't use religion to discriminate as a selection criterion for pupils. So that's what we used to call the baptism barrier. And as I say, it's not an issue in a lot of schools. But where it was an issue, it has to go. But there are schools exempt, and that's schools, say like Church of Ireland schools, where they're representing, where the religious community represents up to 10% of the population. So those schools got an exemption from that element of the legislation. So they may still discriminate in favour of children of their ethos, but Catholic schools can't, because Catholic schools represent about 90% of the primary schools. So they cannot use baptism as a filter for deciding whether or not children are entitled to a place in the school. That was another thing that had a practical impact on families coming in, particularly new families coming into Ireland who coming from different religions, or the growing number of younger families who didn't particularly want to get their children baptised, and then found that they had to get them baptised in order to get on the list for the local school.
And just before I let you go, Catherine, you have a piece in today's paper about the shortage of teachers in secondary schools. Yeah.
That's been an ongoing problem in a number of subjects, and it's a growing list of subjects like Irish, modern languages, home economics, some of the maths, some of the science subjects. And the Teachers Union of Ireland, one of the second-level unions, did a survey recently, and they asked principals about the particular difficulties they had in this area over the last 6 months. And what emerged from that was that almost all schools had advertised posts for which they didn't get any applications. And about half of schools, about 56%, more than half, 56% of schools currently have vacancies because in one or more of these subjects because they couldn't fill the post. So that is causing very serious problems for schools, and it's a problem that has been there for a few years.
It's hard to believe they get no applications at all, isn't it?
I know, yeah. Well, they're saying it's because teachers. Well, in some subjects maybe there aren't enough teachers, aren't enough qualified teachers around. That's possible, and we know we've seen a drain of teachers to places like the Middle East over the last decade, and they're blaming the two-tier pay scales for that. The other thing they say, Dublin has been affected because the cost of accommodation in Dublin, and young teachers were moving to rural Ireland rather than trying to find a job in Dublin because they felt with their with starting salaries they couldn't afford to live in Dublin. However, this survey is showing that the problem is not only Dublin; it's around the country. I know that the colleges of education now have opened more places in the last couple of years to train up more teachers in certain subjects, particularly say the STEM subjects like maths and the sciences, to try to address the shortages. But it'll be a few years before those graduates are out in the marketplace. So the problem is there, certainly for the medium term, and it's going to grow in some ways because we know that the school population is growing at second level, so there'll be more students in more schools, and at the same time the Department of Education wants to offer more subject choice, but the reality is in many of these subjects the schools have the practical problem of not being able to find a teacher to teach it.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Historically in Ireland there's plenty of, say, English and history teachers, but other areas wouldn't have as many, and now it's really showing through now. It's a big problem. Yeah.
Okay, Catherine, thanks a million for that.
Okay.
See you. Bye-bye. That's Catherine Donnelly there, Irish Independence education correspondent. Some of you have been getting in touch with what we've been talking about. This says, listening to the comments about whiplash on your programme, I don't think either of you must be suffering from it. I was involved in a crash in September where I'm still suffering. I'm in a job that is quite physical and I was out of work for a month. I'm still in constant niggling pain. I've had broken bones that have healed quicker and not as painful. So I don't think to say it's like a bruised thumb is accurate. I think you might be conflating two different things that we were talking about there. I can go into a doctor and say, I think I have whiplash. That's kind of, as far as I know, there's no sort of diagnosis of it. It's not a broken bone. It's like soft tissue damage. You kind of have to take somebody's word for it that they're in pain. That's the point that we were making. So there's nothing, the point that the doctor who spoke about this previously, and he is a doctor, was making that people are going in, they attend for physio and everything, and as soon as they get their settlement, lo and behold, their pain levels have disappeared and he never sees them again. And that was the point that he was making. And we didn't say it was like a bruised thumb at all. We were saying there's people getting high awards for something that is basically pretty much that a couple of paracetamol can cure. And that is a fact. Like, that's part of what the problem is with the insurance industry at this time, that they pay out. We're the only country, you heard Peter Boland there, we're the only country in the world who would give you like 17 grand for something pretty minor that you will recover from fairly quickly. But we did make the point that we weren't talking about anybody who's in proper pain and who deserves every penny that they get. We're talking about the shysters who are like swinging the lead and people who are just getting awards for things that they don't need to be getting awards for. That, your life hasn't changed dramatically. You'll be able to go back to work. You'll be off work for a week or two, and that's all the compensation you need. You get your payment for the week or two that you'd be off work and any bills covered. You don't need extra money to be given to you for the trauma, unless you want to be paying more, everybody paying more for their insurance. That's the problem with the insurance industry as is. 083 3333 975. You text 846 for your phone calls back after these. You are welcome back to the programme. A caller was on to say her local rural school in Waterford is seen as a desirable school, and so kids are being driven in from lots of areas outside the locality, causing lots of congestion for the locals. It's gotten awfully snobby, says the caller. Kids should have to go to the school closest to them. Somebody else is saying, have a look at education posts. The posts are not permanent. That's why they have no applicants, according to this texter. This is on the secondary school teachers. They're not getting any applicants for the job. Now, my next guest is waiting patiently on the line. It's Fiona Ferris, who's Deputy CEO of As I Am, Ireland's national autism charity and advocacy service. You're very welcome to the programme, Fiona.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. And obviously I'm talking to you because of the comments by Catherine Noon about the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. He's autistic, she's reported to have said. He's on the spectrum, there's no doubt about it. He's uncomfortable socially and he doesn't always get the in-between bits. She's since apologised and he has no issue with it. But advocacy groups like yourself are still all up in arms about it.
Well, see, the thing is, while apologies are great and they're a first step, it's really what comes after that's most important. I suppose the autistic community, as you can imagine, were very upset by this because it created a negative association with what autism is, first of all, but also it undermined the complexity of the condition. Autism isn't something that's used to describe a collection of characteristics that somebody has, never mind negative characteristics. It's an extremely complex and individual and invisible condition that impact people greatly day to day. So to say in such a casual way, in a sweeping statement, that somebody is autistic without ever having been diagnosed, well, it's understandable why that's upset so many people.
But she was talking about, like, if she said it as a general statement, in front of a microphone, then I would completely get the uproar about it. But she said it about somebody that she knows, and it was just in a conversation. It was no official statement. Is everybody not getting a little bit over-aerated? Because she was talking about a specific person that she knows who doesn't have a problem with what she said, and she's apologised.
Well, she was talking about a specific person she knows that has not been diagnosed with autism. And that's the problem, is the fact that people are using the word autistic to describe people who are not in fact autistic, who are not impacted by the condition. It's not an adjective, it's not a descriptor, it's a diagnosis. And it's a diagnosis that means people are greatly impacted in various areas of their lives on a daily basis that make things like mental health difficult, make getting employment much more difficult, make participation in school difficult. And to say, well, he's definitely autistic, on the record, now it might not have been in front of a microphone, but she knew she was being recorded. And straight after that, when said why she said that, she denied that she did, and then went on to say, well, I didn't actually mean in terms of the illness. Now, autism is absolutely not an illness. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition. It's not an illness. Nobody is sick from their autism. So it just showed the lack of understanding about what the condition is. And I suppose for us as an organisation, that causes great concern, because autism is an issue that requires governmental support from the healthcare system, from the education system. And if a public and political representative thinks that it's an illness and thinks that she can call, another leader autistic even though he hasn't been diagnosed, well, that is incredibly concerning, and it makes me question what emphasis the government is placing on autism as a condition that needs support.
Apart from that, do you think we're getting better at dealing with autism in all its ranges? Because it seems to me that autism is like a personality, like everybody has a different version. That you can't put your finger on one thing and say that's autistic. It's so varied.
It is incredibly varied now. It's a very broad spectrum, but you absolutely can put your finger on a diagnosis and say that's autism, because in order to be diagnosed, you have to meet very specific criteria in different areas, such as communication, sensory processing, social imagination, and social interaction. So it's not something you say you have an autistic personality. It's you have met the criteria on this assessment to receive a diagnosis of autism. And in order to do that, you experience extreme differences in those various areas. So it's not a case of, are we getting a little bit worked up about this?
No, the point I'm trying to make is that if you do something that will help one person with autism, it has no benefit whatsoever to somebody else. That's the point I make. It's so varied and it's so different that it would be it's not just one umbrella thing you can do for everybody.
Well, there are certain things you can do, and the first step is the understanding piece, because some of the biggest barriers for inclusion for autistic people aren't anything to do with their condition. It's to do with how society chooses to respond, the lack of understanding, and this one was a perfect example. But I think in Ireland as well, sometimes we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that we don't say anything at all. Now, we're not saying to use the word autistic is bad. It's just you need to use it to describe an autistic person who's happy to disclose the fact that they are diagnosed. You don't use it to generalise and to add to the stereotype and stigma that's already associated with being on the autism spectrum that makes it very difficult to participate in society already. OK, we leave it there, Fiona. Thanks very much for talking to me. No problem. Thanks. See you. Bye-bye. That's Fiona Ferris there, Deputy CEO of As I Am, Ireland's national autism charity. I'll be back with more for you after these. You are welcome back to the programme. Now, Dr. Ida Milne is a European history lecturer at Carlow College and a historian of disease. Historian of disease, that's a title you don't hear I have to talk about this. You're very welcome to the programme, Dr. Milne.
Thank you, and I think I invented the title myself because I always felt historian of medicine is much too limiting diseases.
This is way more exciting.
Society, yeah.
I wonder, like when you were 6 years old, were you going, I'm going to be a historian of disease when I grow up? Because I think you should, really. But there's a serious thing to what we're talking about. You're going to be giving a talk about Spanish flu in Waterford on Friday at St. Patrick's Gateway at 8 o'clock. The Spanish flu, I suppose, was just explain to people a little bit about Spanish flu and the effect that it had.
Well, Spanish flu was it was the biggest influenza pandemic we've ever had in the world, at least since the 1500s, when we've been able to count back pandemics that far. And we think it probably killed about upwards of 50 million people and infected between 1/5 and half the world's population, which was about 2 billion at the time. And maybe upwards of 23,000 Irish people died from it. And I think from my estimates that it infected about 1/5 of the population on the island here. So it really paralysed Irish society as it was going through. And at a very interesting time, 1918, 1919, as the First World War is ending and as we're entering the revolutionary period and the very complex time we had in history then.
And did it originate in Spain?
No, Spanish flu is something of a misnomer. We actually don't know where it originated. We're still trying to find out. I'm part of a group of international researchers from different disciplines who look at flu, and we come with different theories about it. But Spain was one of the countries that wasn't combatant in the war within Europe. So a lot of the major news reports came from there because there was no censorship in the Spanish papers. The combatant armies were already well infected by the time that Spain actually caught it. And the King of Spain, Alfonso the 13th, went down with it, and several thousand of his courtiers. But of course, none of the armies wanted to admit to the enemy where their troops were being infected. Now, that said, it is something of a misnomer because it was very well covered in the newspapers here at the time and in Britain as well.
And
it's something of a false illusion that the censorship is the reason why it was called Spanish.
And you'd imagine that, like years ago, diseases really wouldn't have been able to spread because we weren't all coming and going to different countries the way we are now. But when they got hold of a place, they decimated populations.
Oh, absolutely. But do remember that rail was at its maximum in the world, really, in 1918, 1919. Certainly in Ireland, it was at its maximum. Then you had a lot of ship travel. And with the World War, and particularly America coming into the World War, the troop transports, America had only recently entered the war, the troop transports, the bunks were very close together, like 3 or 4 feet apart at the time. And as they began to realise that flu was spreading around the ships and causing awful damage, they did change the gaps between and take the bunks and take a lot more measures to prevent people with the flu actually going onto the ships in the first place. So it has an awful lot of echoes with Wuhan, the Wuhan coronavirus today, you know.
Now, you're also seeing this is your area of expertise. Mumps is kind of making a resurgence.
Yes, and actually, even my niece, who was vaccinated, she caught the mumps, and it's a big problem with third-level students in colleges in Ireland at the moment. And it's happening to people we don't quite know why, to people who have been vaccinated, but it's seen to be as the result of vaccination hesitancy that there is more mumps circulating in the environment because of that. Because, in my view, people, some parents have come to see vaccination as being more dangerous than the disease because they're not as aware of these diseases and they wouldn't have caught them like I did, you know, and therefore I wouldn't wish measles on anybody having caught it as a 9-year-old, but it's also a very dangerous disease and a lot of people can end up hospitalised or get things like meningitis or other diseases like that out of it. So people, because they're not as aware of the damage that measles and mumps once did, have come to see the vaccine as being more dangerous than the disease, and it's simply not.
So Friday, St. Patrick's Gateway, 8 o'clock is when you're giving the talk?
Yes, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing people there.
infectious diseases over the course, by the historian of disease. I love it. Dr. Mill, thanks very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye. That's Dr. Ida Milne there. I'd say, judging by what you had to say there, it's going to be a very interesting talk, because, I mean, I've read a couple of books about things like that, and when you read what happened and how the thing spread and everything, it is quite fascinating. I'd say be worth showing up for that. Now, Breda Birmingham is in the studio with me, who's running the Midlife Women Rock Cafes. Come a little bit closer to the microphone there, Breda. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. This
is happening in the Waterford Health Park.
That's right.
We're back every month since September.
That's right. It's been running since September, and we're back next month on Tuesday the 5th from 10 until 12, and we continue then for the year. And it's open to women who are looking for information and want to empower themselves to manage this life transition. That's
which is the menopause.
Which is the menopause, exactly.
It's not called the change anymore. That made it sound like you were going to turn into a werewolf or something.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm also starting, due to demand, an empowerment programme in Waterford, Cheshire, on the 19th of February for 6 weeks. It's a 6-week programme empowering women to proactively and positively manage menopausal transition, because there are so many myths out there, there are so many misconceptions around this whole journey that every woman in the world actually transitions through. So where I'm coming from, I want to dispel a lot of these myths. I mean, in the last 6 months, I've met over 500 women, and it's amazing the different stories that are emerging about what actually happens to women as they transition through. And the media, I believe, are paying too much attention to the negative side of menopause.
I was just going to say, is a lot of it kind of psychological?
It is. Psychological and emotional is a huge part, and that's not been given as much relevance or even as much attention as the physical symptoms, let's say the hot sweats and the night sweats and the hot flushes, whereas there's something far deeper occurring and happening to women, and it's actually leading to probably one of the most powerful times in women's lives, the actual transition. I've been researching and reviewing the research for the last 3 years, and in the last 2.5 years there's been about 25 papers in between the UK and Australia alone on the positive impact that menopause has on women's lives. And I think we need
What are the positive impacts?
Well, I suppose the first one that I'm always saying is our creativity. Our creativity actually starts to skyrocket once It does, in our 50s. There are 2 periods in our lives, our 20s and our 50s. And I did the Vitality Expo in Dublin last year, and I met about 200 women over the weekend. And I was so amazed at the amount of women who were coming to the end of menopause, and they were explaining how they were starting off new careers, they were changing career, or they were starting new businesses. They had this renewed energy and zest for life, and the research is there.
I presume this is when you're through
post, yeah, exactly, post menopause. I mean, I think a lot of the negativity is around how women are getting stuck. They're actually getting stuck as we're transitioning through, but a lot of it is due to misinformation. And the 3 narratives that I keep hearing are fear, shame and denial.
Why would you feel shame?
These are 3. It's coming through. It's associated with ageing. That whole concept of ageing, and this idea that you're coming to menopause and that you're going to be past your best, which is completely, untrue. I mean, we've got such a massive skill set by the time we reach 50 years of age. That needs to be celebrated. I was at the Her Story launch last night in Dublin, and it's amazing. There are over 1,000 stories of women in the Irish dictionary that haven't been mentioned. They're invisible women, and I do feel women that are actually transitioning through menopause are invisible, because in academia these are the cohort that are least studied, would you believe, between 45 and 55 women across the lifespan.
Is there a male menopause?
There possibly is. There possibly is. I haven't looked at the
see,
research.
the poor fellas, nobody's even bothered to investigate whether they have a menopause or not.
There. I mean, there are 400,000 women in Ireland at the moment transitioning through menopause. 80% have symptoms, 25% have to take time off work. And a startling statistic is the mental health rates. I mean, mental health rates for women are highest between 45 and 55. And it's complex and it's complicated, but it is related to the way menopause is managed in Ireland and in the UK. I mean, only yesterday, one of the newspapers in the UK, they were talking about the mismanagement of menopause and the amount of women that are prescribed antidepressants for menopause when they shouldn't be. And I was listening to that lady earlier on Thrive talking about stress management, because I found myself, it was cortisol, it was the cortisol hormone that was the issue for me personally, the stress hormone. Once I reduced cortisol and reduced my stress levels, a lot of my symptoms disappeared and subsided.
Okay, so you're also going to be facilitating a 6-week information and education class on managing menopause. That starts on the 19th of February. How do people get in touch and find more information about that, please?
The Midlife Women Rock Project. I'm on Facebook, Instagram and on the website.
Under Midlife Women Rock?
Midlife Women Rock, yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks a lot.
That's Breda Birmingham there. Midlife Women Rock Cafes. They are in the on the 4th of February at the Waterford Health Park, and they've been running monthly there since September. Now, just before we finish up, a couple of things to read out to you. Maria, why do so many people, when talking to the media, go on about schools run by the Catholic Church and talk down such schools? I worked in a rural school in the county in the past, and there was Anglicans, Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses pupils in the school, and there was never a problem. When pupils enrolled, we asked for a baptismal cert if they were baptised outside the parish, but explained it was only used for when it came to the sacraments. If they were not baptised a Catholic, there was never a problem. The Anglicans and Muslims children even stay on in the religion class and went and supported their classmates when they received the sacraments. The Jehovah's asked to be excused from all religion classes, and there was never a problem with it. Their parents and the school principal agreed they could go to the secretary's office and could catch up on other work. I think the problem arises in, what's religion doing in schools at all, and why should anyone have to go and sit in a secretary's office when, we should learn your religion at home or in Sunday school or something. I think that's where the problem starts. And a final one to finish up on. My daughter was diagnosed with autism in September and is non-verbal, says this texter. We found it very difficult in public social situations where people are so insensitive and ignorant to what autism is. My daughter needs to be on the phone to watch videos and songs to stay regulated and calm in public. Otherwise, she doesn't understand to sit and wait. I was waiting in a doctor's area for myself, and a lady abruptly asked me to turn it down, and I had to take her aside and explain. In another situation, I was waiting in the public health nurse area, and another elderly woman working came over and gave out to me abruptly to turn the phone down, and was very rude and insensitive when I explained to her our situation. So it's very hard, and we find what people aren't good to consider, that there might be an issue before jumping to conclusions that our daughter is being bold by having the phone turned up loudly. It makes us feel overwhelmed and filled with anxiety to go anywhere in public. I feel so sorry for you, but I don't think harping on about the fact that somebody is using the word autism in a non-malicious, descriptive way. Okay, Fiona said he isn't diagnosed and he's not autistic. He wasn't diagnosed and she had no business saying it. But some people just use language to try and explain themselves. And if you're going to take that away from people, that you can't, unless you actually, you can't say, oh, I was totally stressed out when really nothing is wrong with you. We're going to take all descriptive language away and remove the ability to describe anything for fear of offending somebody. She didn't set out to offend anyone. Nobody sets out to offend people. And if we were maybe able to be more open, we might be able to just talk about things, and people wouldn't be able to get upset. And I'm sure the people that you explained to were mortified when you explained. And I feel so sorry for you that you had to go through that, because it must make you feel overwhelmed and filled with anxiety when you are out in public. But I really don't think harping on about somebody's use of a word in a descriptive way is helping the situation really at the end of the day. But that's just my opinion, bringing the show to a close. You have been listening to Deise Today. The programme is produced by Julie Smith. Damien will be back with you tomorrow, and Jeff Harris is up next, so keep it right here on WLR. And you enjoy the rest of your day, your Wednesday, the hump day, as Julie called it this morning. So you enjoy yourself, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you. Bye-bye.